Galactic law broke when humans fought. Commander L had served the Galactic Enforcement Bureau for 300 years. In that time, she had watched 1,000 different species join the compact. Each one learned the same lesson. War was over. Violence was finished. The founding races had written it out of existence 12,000 years ago. They replaced fighting with talking. They replaced battles with algorithms. The Bureau held absolute power, and no one ever questioned it. When humanity's ships first arrived at Station Nexus, El watched them dock without much interest. They were soft creatures, bipeds with thin skin from a yellow star in a quiet corner of the galaxy. Their ambassador was a woman named. She smiled too much. She asked too many questions about how the Bureau enforced its rules. The trouble started 3 cycles later. The Dominion filed a claim on a human colony world called New Brisbane. They used the unclaimed territory provision. The provision was simple and clear. Any world settled by a species not yet part of the compact could be given to a compact member who needed it. They had demonstrated need. They were running out of space on their home worlds. The algorithm examined their claim. The algorithm ruled in their favor. Ambassador came to El's office the next morning. She asked if there was some kind of appeal process. El explained that there was no appeal. The law was the law. The algorithm had decided. New Brisbane belonged to the now. Nodded slowly. She tapped her fingers on the desk. Then she asked a question that El had never heard before in all her centuries of service. What if we refuse to leave? El had to think about this. She actually had to search the archives to understand what the human was asking. No species had ever refused a ruling before. The Bureau had an enforcement fleet, yes, 92 warships with weapons that could crack planets, but those ships had not fired their weapons in 4,000 years. They existed as symbols, reminders of a time before the compact brought peace to the galaxy. She explained this to as patiently as she could. The human listened. She nodded. She thanked El for her time, then she returned to her ship. 2 days later, the Bureau received a transmission from the New Brisbane system. The settlement fleet had been destroyed, all 47 vessels, gone. The human colonists had done it using chemical propellants and metal projectiles, weapons so primitive that they were not even classified as weapons under compact law. They had shields designed to stop energy beams and particle weapons. They had no defense against chunks of metal flying through space at high speed. El read the report 3 times. She looked at the images of the wreckage. She watched the recordings from the few escape pods that managed to launch before their ships were torn apart. The humans had given them one warning: leave or die. They had assumed it was a bluff. After all, no one fought anymore. Fighting was against the law. For the first time in 8,000 years, the Galactic Enforcement Bureau convened an emergency session. Every founding species sent their highest representatives. The great chamber on Station Nexus filled with beings of light and crystal and living mathematics. They had not gathered like this since the last Great War, the one that nearly destroyed the galaxy before the compact was formed. The question before them was simple: what do we do about the humans? High Arbiter floated at the center of the chamber, was not a creature of flesh or energy, was pure mathematics given form. It had calculated the outcomes of 10 million disputes and never once been wrong. Now it spoke in numbers that translated into words. The humans have violated 17 provisions of the compact. The punishment protocols are clear: isolation, quarantine, cultural restructuring until they learn to follow our ways. The chamber murmured in agreement. This was how things were done. A species that broke the rules was corrected. Their culture was adjusted until they fit into the compact's peaceful order. It had worked 100 times before. But then a voice spoke from the petitioner's platform below. We decline. Ambassador stood alone on the platform. She looked small against the vast chamber, but her voice was steady. You cannot decline, said. The law is clear. Your law, said. Not ours, we never agreed to it. We were told to join or be absorbed. That is not consent, that is conquest with extra steps. The chamber fell silent. No one had ever spoken to the High Arbiter this way. Continued. You built a system where anyone can take anything from anyone else as long as they file the right paperwork. You call it law, we call it theft. And when they came to steal our home, we stopped them. Show me the law that says we cannot defend ourselves. Process this for a long moment. The mathematical being searched through 12,000 years of legal code. It cross-referenced every provision and precedent. And for the first time in its existence, it found a gap. The compact had rules against aggression. It had rules against starting conflicts, but it had never occurred to the founders that they would need rules about ending them. The whole system was built on one assumption that was so obvious no one had ever written it down. Everyone would comply. The humans had not. And because they had not started the conflict, because they had come to them, there was technically no provision that covered what they had done. We will send the enforcement fleet, said one of the elder beings, a creature of crystalline light that had been alive since before humanity discovered fire. They will learn obedience. Smiled, it was not a pleasant smile. We were hoping you would say that. Please send them. We have studied your fleet very carefully over the past few months. We know their capabilities. We know their weaknesses. We have prepared countermeasures for every weapon system they carry. She paused. But before you give that order, I suggest a conversation instead. Because unlike we do not want to fight you. We just want to live. High Arbiter did something unprecedented. It requested a recess. It needed time to think. The great chamber emptied. The founding species retreated to consult among themselves, and in the silence, Ambassador remained on the platform, waiting. She had all the time in the world. The negotiations began 3 days after the emergency session. They would continue for 2 years. The compact sent its finest legal minds, beings who had practiced law for centuries, creatures who existed as pure logic. They came ready to overwhelm humanity with the weight of 12,000 years of precedent. Humanity sent was 43 years old. She had spent 20 years arguing property disputes in Lagos before the first contact with alien life. She was not impressed by age or power or fancy titles. She had faced judges who did not want to hear her arguments. She had fought against opponents with more money and more influence. She had won anyway. The compact's lawyers expected her to challenge their laws, to argue that human customs should override galactic precedent. They had prepared responses to every possible attack. Did not attack their laws, she did something much worse. She read them. All 12,000 years of them, every provision, every amendment, every footnote and exception. She spent the first 3 months just reading. The compact's representatives grew impatient. They demanded she present her case. She told them she was not ready yet. When she finally came to the negotiating table, she brought a stack of documents 5 feet high. Each one contained a question. Your law says that no species may commit aggression against another, she began. But you have no definition of aggression. Is it aggression when they filed their claim? They intended to remove us from our homes. If we had done that to them, would that be aggression? The compact's lawyers conferred. They admitted that filing a claim was not aggression. It was simply using the legal system as intended. Then when does aggression begin? Asked. When the fleet entered our system, when they began landing operations, when they started removing our people from their homes, at what point were we allowed to say no? There was no answer. The law had never considered the question. Continued through her stack. She found provisions that contradicted each other. She found rights that were guaranteed but had no mechanism for enforcement. She found punishments that had never been applied because no one had ever tested them. The compact had built a beautiful system, but it was a system designed for beings who agreed on everything. It assumed that everyone wanted the same thing. It assumed that all species valued peace above all else. It assumed that when a conflict arose, both sides would accept the ruling and move on. Humanity did not make those assumptions. "You have built a house of cards," said to the council on the 100th day of negotiations. "Beautiful from a distance, impressive to look at, but it only stands because no one has ever pushed against it." High Arbiter observed from its position above the council. The mathematical being had been processing the negotiations from the beginning. It had never seen anything like this before. The human lawyer was not trying to break their laws. She was showing them that their laws had always been broken. "What do you want?" asked finally. "You have demonstrated the flaws in our system. You could use this knowledge to destroy the compact entirely. Why do you not?" Looked up at the towering figure of pure thought. "We do not want to destroy anything. We want to build something better." She opened another document. This one was not a question, it was a proposal. "You have laws against violence. We agree with those laws. War is terrible. We have fought enough wars among ourselves to know this. But your laws assume that peace means submission. That order means obedience. We believe differently." The council listened as outlined her proposal. She called it the Humanity Amendment. But it was not just for humans. It was for any species that might join the compact in the future. The amendment defined words that the compact had never needed before: aggression, self-defense, proportional response, territorial sovereignty. It created frameworks for situations the founders had never imagined. What happens when one party attacks and the other defends? What are the limits of acceptable force? How do we determine who started a conflict? Some of the elder species were horrified. They had spent 10,000 years building a galaxy without war. Now these newcomers wanted to create rules for fighting. "You will bring chaos," said the crystalline elder. "You will return us to the age of blood and fire." "No," said, "we will bring choice." She stood before the full council now. Representatives from 100 species watched her. Most had never seen a human before the first contact. Now they were witnessing something unprecedented. "Your peace is not real," continued. "It is enforced. It is maintained by the threat of punishment. Species follow your rules because they have no other option, but that is not peace. That is control." She gestured to the assembly around her. "True peace is when beings choose not to fight. When they could fight, when they have the ability and the right, but they decide that cooperation is better. You took that choice away from everyone. You made violence impossible and called it peace. But all you did was hide the conflict. It was always there, waiting." Processed her words for a long moment. The mathematical being ran calculations on outcomes and probabilities. It examined 12,000 years of data. "You are correct," it said finally. "There have been 743 conflicts in compact history that were resolved through forced compliance. In each case, the underlying dispute was never truly settled. The tension remained. The potential for violence was simply suppressed." The council stirred at this revelation. Many had lived through those conflicts. They had believed they were resolved. "Your amendment would bring those tensions to the surface," continued. "It would allow species to express disagreement through force. It would allow them to defend themselves," corrected. "Not to attack, not to conquer, only to protect what is theirs. And in doing so, it would force everyone to actually resolve their disputes, rather than burying them under legal paperwork." The debate raged for another year. Species that had not spoken to each other found themselves on the same side. Some wanted the amendment passed. Some wanted it rejected. Some wanted modifications that would take decades to implement. Through it all remained patient. She answered every question. She revised every clause. She worked 18-hour days for months at a time. Her hair went gray. Her joints began to ache, but she never stopped. Because she understood something that the ancient beings around her had forgotten. Laws are not just rules. They are statements about who we are. and the Compact's laws had been saying something terrible for 12,000 years. They had been saying that peace was more important than justice, that order was more important than freedom, that it was better to lose everything than to fight for anything. Humanity disagreed. And on the last day of the second year, the Council voted. The Humanity Amendment passed. The day the amendment was, the great chamber on Station Nexus was silent. The representatives of 100 species sat in their designated areas. They had voted. They had changed the foundation of galactic law for the first time in 8,000 years. None of them quite knew what would happen next. Stood at the petitioner's platform where Ambassador had stood 2 years before. Her hair was entirely gray now. She had given 2 years of her life to this moment, but she did not look tired. She looked satisfied. High Arbiter descended from its position to address the assembly directly. This was unusual. The mathematical being typically spoke from above, maintaining its position as an impartial observer. But this was not a typical day. The Humanity Amendment is now part of the Compact, announced. From this day forward, the right to self-defense is recognized for all member species. The definitions of aggression, proportional response, and territorial sovereignty are now binding law. The chamber remained quiet. Then slowly, something happened that had never witnessed in all its centuries of existence. Applause. Not from all of them. Some of the elder species remained still, their ancient forms unmoving. They had opposed the amendment until the end. They believed it would lead to chaos and bloodshed, but others joined the sound. Species that had never supported humanity. Species that had been victims of the old system, forced to give up their homes or their rights because an algorithm decided against them. They applauded because finally, someone had said what they had always felt but never dared to speak. Commander L watched from the observation gallery above. She had followed every moment of the negotiations. She had read every draft of the amendment, and she still did not fully understand. She made her way down to the main level after the ceremony concluded. The crowds were dispersing. Representatives were returning to their ships, eager to report to their home worlds, but remained at the platform, gathering her documents. "May I ask you something?" Elle said. Looked up, she smiled. It was a tired smile, but a genuine one. "Of course, Commander. After 2 years, I think I owe you at least one answer without charging my usual fee." Elle stood beside the human woman. Even after all this time, she found it strange to look at a being so fragile, so short-lived. In another 60 years, this woman would be dead. Yet she had changed a system that had lasted 12. "Why did you not just attack us?" Elle asked. "Your weapons proved effective against the... You had clearly studied our fleet. You knew our weaknesses. You could have destroyed the enforcement ships and taken whatever you wanted by force." Set down her documents. She considered the question carefully. Because winning was never the point. She turned to face the commander fully. "We did not come to the stars looking for enemies. We came looking for friends, partners, other minds to learn from and share with. When we met the Compact, we were excited. A galaxy full of civilizations that had found a way to live together without constant war. We wanted to be part of that." She paused. "But not at any price. When they came for New Brisbane, we learned that belonging to your system meant surrendering, giving up the right to say no. We could not accept that. But we also did not want to become conquerors ourselves. That would make us no better than what we were fighting against." Elle processed this. "So you fought though but refused to fight us." "We defended ourselves against the... There is a difference. They came to take our home. We stopped them. When your council threatened to send the fleet, we were prepared to defend ourselves again. But we hoped we would not have to. We hoped that you would listen." "And we did," Elle said slowly. "Yes, you did. That is why we are still here, having this conversation, instead of fighting a war that would have hurt both sides." Picked up her documents again. She tucked them under her arm. The amendment I wrote is not about fighting, it is about choice. Before today, species in the compact had no choice. They followed the rules or they were destroyed. Now they have options. They can still choose peace. They can still choose cooperation. But it will be their choice, not something forced upon them. She looked around the great chamber. Soon it would fill again with new disputes and new debates. But the nature of those debates would be different now. 12,000 years ago, your founders ended war by removing the possibility of fighting. They thought that was the answer, but all they did was bottle up the conflicts and pretend they did not exist. Every time a species was forced to give up something they cared about, that resentment stayed. It built up. Somewhere in this galaxy, there is a species still angry about something that happened 5,000 years ago, and until today, they had no way to address that anger except to swallow it and obey. You think the amendment will change that? Elle asked. I think it gives them a voice, not a weapon, a voice, the ability to say no, to defend what they believe is right. That is terrifying to some of your elders. They remember the wars of the past. They fear that any violence will lead back to those times. Shook her head. But I think they are wrong. I think that when beings can say no, they do not need to fight. The ability to resist is often enough. They attacked New Brisbane because they believed we would not resist. They believed we could not resist. If they had known the truth, they might have chosen differently. They might have negotiated instead of invaded. So the right to fight leads to less fighting, Elle said. It seemed contradictory, but she was beginning to understand. The right to defend yourself leads to more respect, corrected. And respect leads to better agreements. When both sides know that the other can walk away, they try harder to find solutions that work for everyone. She began walking toward the exit. Elle fell into step beside her. There will be conflicts, admitted as they walked. The amendment allows for defensive action. Some species will abuse that. They will claim defense when they are really attacking. There will be disputes about where the line falls. Then why allow it at all? Because the alternative is worse. Pretending that conflict does not exist does not make it go away. It just makes it invisible, and invisible problems cannot be solved. They reached the main entrance of the chamber. Through the great windows, the stars of the galaxy spread out in all directions. Somewhere out there, human ships were patrolling the New Brisbane system. Somewhere else, they were rebuilding their fleet. And in 1,000 other places, species were reading the text of the new amendment and wondering what it meant for their future. I have one more question, Elle said. Nodded. Do you really believe this will work? That the compact will survive the change you have made? Was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer. I believe that the compact that existed before was already dying. It was held together by force and habit, not by genuine agreement. Eventually, something would have broken it. If not us, then someone else. A species that was not willing to talk. A conflict that could not be suppressed. She turned to face the commander one last time. What I believe is that the compact can become something better. Not a system where peace is enforced from above, but a community where it is chosen from within. That will take time. Centuries, maybe. Some of your oldest species will resist the change. Some will leave. But those who stay will be there because they want to be, not because they have no choice. She smiled. And that, commander, is the only foundation that can last. Not law, not force, not algorithms. Just beings choosing every day to stand together, to solve problems instead of fighting, to help each other instead of conquering. That is what we wanted for humanity when we came to the stars, and now maybe it can be true for everyone. Elle watched the human woman walk away, small and fragile, a life measured in decades rather than centuries. Yet she had done something that all the great powers of the galaxy had failed to do for 12,000 years. She had asked the right question. In the centuries that followed, the Humanity Amendment would become the most studied document in compact history. Scholars from 1,000 worlds would analyze every word, searching for hidden meanings and implications. But they all reached the same conclusion in the end. The humans had not broken galactic law. They had simply proven that it was never complete. And in fixing that flaw, they had given the galaxy something it had not had in 12,000 years. A choice.